In today's video, we'll look at a homicide with a heartbreaking twist, a murder that was a media circus in Australia, and one of the most notorious murders in modern Dutch history. However, before we get to that, we want to take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Magellan TV. Magellan TV is an amazing new documentary streaming service that was created by filmmakers, and they have amassed thousands of documentary movies, series, and playlists. The documentaries are ad-free, and many of them are available in 4K. Magellan TV has documentaries in a bunch of different genres like Earth, biography, and current history. So it's a great way to learn more and get insight into topics you're already passionate about. My favorite genre on Magellan TV is crime and mystery. One doc I really found interesting was Tortured to Death, Murdering the Nanny. It documents the disturbing and bizarre murder of Sophie Leonette. Another great crime documentary is One Killer Punch. The documentary examines seemingly everyday situations that escalate to the point where a single punch is thrown and one person is killed and the other is facing murder charges. Magellan TV is easy to access. It's available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, Google Play, and iOS, or simply cast from your phone to your TV. If you want to check out Magellan TV for yourself, go to magellantv.com/criminally-listed and you'll get a month for free. So please help support Criminally Listed and get access to thousands of great documentaries by checking out Magellan TV. Number 3. Annie Birkett. On October 2nd, 1917, a body was found in some brush off of a road in the Chatswood area of Sydney, Australia. The remains were badly burned, making identification impossible. What the medical examiner did determine was that she probably died at least 2 days earlier. He thought she was about 40 years old, and she was between 5 feet and 5'2". The police thought that the woman was a victim of foul play, but the medical examiner did not find any evidence of this. He did think she was still alive when she caught on fire. In the days after the discovery of the body was made public in the newspaper, no one claimed the body. So she was buried under the name Jane Doe. 2.5 years later, a young man in his early 20s named Harry Birkett and his aunt, Lily, went to the police. They had not seen or heard from Harry's mother and Lily's sister, Annie Birkett, for about 2.5 years, and they wanted to report her missing. When Annie disappeared, she was 35 years old, and she was married to a man named Harry Crawford. Crawford was her second husband. Her first husband, who was Harry Birkett's father, had died many years earlier. Harry said that after his mother went missing, Crawford told him that his mother had run off with another man. But Harry did not think that his mother would do that and not get in contact with him. Harry said that the last time he saw his mother was in late September 1917. After she went missing, he and Crawford moved to inner Sydney. Harry told the police about 2 strange experiences he had with his stepfather after his mother went missing. He said that one time, Crawford took him to an ocean cliff in eastern Sydney called the Gap. The Gap is an infamous suicide hotspot. Harry told the police that Crawford stood on the edge of the cliff and told him to come stand beside him. Harry said he refused to. A week later, Harry said that Crawford took him out to some brush and made him dig a hole. After the hole was dug, they simply left the area. Harry said he remembered one other thing that Crawford made him do that he thought was odd. He made him read a newspaper article from early 1917. The article was about the discovery of charred remains of an unidentified woman in Chatswood. After listening to Harry Birkett, the police concluded that Jane Doe was his mother, Annie Birkett. They also concluded that Harry Crawford had killed her, and on at least 2 occasions he tried to kill Harry Birkett, but for whatever reasons, he did not go through with it. The police were able to track down Harry Crawford in July 1920. He was living in Sydney with his second wife, Elizabeth, whom he had married 9 months earlier. Crawford was arrested, and he made a request that shocked the police. He wanted to be placed in jail with women because he was actually female. Crawford explained he was born in July 1875 in Livorno, Italy, as Eugenia Fellini. Her family immigrated to New Zealand when she was 2 years old. When she was a teenager, she started dressing like a boy, and she would do manual work with her father. Her parents forced her to get married to a man, and she knew that being married to a man was not for her. She was even more put off from her husband when she found out that he was already married and had a child. She left him and started living life as a man using the name Eugene. Eugene eventually ended up in Sydney and took on the name Harry Crawford. He got work as a manual laborer at a variety of different places, like laundries, a rubber factory, and a meat factory. Crawford was a heavy drinker and was well known in Sydney's blue-collar bars. In 1910, he was 35 years old, and he was working as a yardman and driver for a doctor. It was there he met Annie Birkett, who worked as a housekeeper for the doctor. Crawford and Annie were married in February 1913. Crawford said that they had an active sex life, but his wife had never seen him naked. Crawford told the police that his life with Annie and Harry was happy. But other people who knew the family said that wasn't exactly true. Annie did not want to marry Crawford initially because she thought he drank and partied too much. Crawford vowed to change for her, and he did for a while. But not long after they were wed, he reverted back to his old ways. Then in 1917, their life was turned upside down when a 19-year-old woman named Josephine came to live with them. Josephine was Crawford's daughter. When Crawford was in his early 20s and using the name Eugene, he worked on ships. When he was 23, he was working on a ship, and the crew found out he was female. Crawford was sexually assaulted several times by the captain. The crew eventually abandoned her in Newcastle, Australia. As a result of the sexual assaults, Crawford was pregnant. Crawford gave birth to Josephine in 1898. He convinced a childless Italian couple living in Sydney to raise Josephine. Throughout Josephine's life, Crawford visited her several times, but they did not have a healthy relationship. Josephine grew up knowing that Crawford was her mother. After Josephine came to live with him, Annie, and Harry, Crawford begged her not to tell them he was born a female. It's not clear if Josephine ever told Annie, but it's believed that Annie did find out that her husband of 4 years was female. Annie could have learned the news from their neighbors because Josephine did tell the neighbors that Crawford was her mother. The neighbors noticed that after Josephine moved in, Annie and Crawford argued a lot more. Less than a month before Annie went missing, she wrote a letter to a relative saying she found out something shocking about Crawford and she would reveal it soon. Crawford told the police that on September 28, 1917, he and Annie went for a picnic. At some point, they got into an argument. He said that during the argument, Annie tripped and she struck her head on a rock and died. He decided to burn her body because he didn't think that anyone would believe his story. What Crawford didn't know was that Annie was probably still alive when he set her ablaze. It turned out that Crawford was right. No one believed his story. The police theorized that Crawford knew that Annie was going to expose his secret, so he killed her to silence her. So Crawford was charged with Annie's murder. Crawford's second wife had no idea that Crawford was a female, and she was shocked by the revelation. Harry Crawford went to trial in October 1920, and it was a media circus. To many people, the murder was the least interesting aspect of the case. People were more fascinated with how Crawford kept his gender a secret from two different wives. As a result, even though it had nothing to do with the case, the instrument that Crawford used during sex with both of his wives was entered into evidence. The jury deliberated for 2 hours before finding Crawford guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. His sentence was later commuted to life. In February 1931, just over 10 years after he was convicted, Crawford was released on the condition that he live out the rest of his life as a woman. Upon release, she took on the name Jean Ford. After Ford was released from prison, she bought, renovated, and sold boarding houses. On June 9, 1938, Ford, who was 62, went to a real estate agent's office. As she was crossing Oxford Street, she was struck by a car and killed. While she was in prison, her daughter, Josephine, had died from tuberculosis. So no one claimed her body, and she was buried in a pauper's grave. Incidentally, Jean Ford, aka Eugenia Fellini, aka Harry Crawford, was killed in an area that is now considered Sydney's LGBT district. Number 2. Nicole Vanden Hurk. Nicole Vanden Hurk was born on July 4, 1980, in Erkelenz, which is a small town in western Germany. When her mother, Angeline Techmeyer, got pregnant, she was dating a man named Ad Vanden Hurk, who was a Dutch singer. Initially, Ad thought that Nicole was his biological daughter. But a year after Nicole was born, Angelica revealed that he wasn't the father. Angelica had slept with another man who was only identified as a German entrepreneur who was married. A blood test would later confirm this. Nevertheless, Ad, Angelica, and Nicole moved to Eindhoven, which is a city in the south of the Netherlands. 2 years after Nicole was born, Ad and Angelica got married, and Ad officially adopted Nicole. But in 1989, when Nicole was 9 years old, Ad and Angelica got divorced. Even though Ad was not Nicole's biological father, he applied for full custody of her, and he was granted it. The main reason he was granted custody was because Angelica was mentally unwell. Ad traveled around a lot for work, so Nicole spent a lot of her time at her grandmother's home. In early 1995, nearly 6 years after the divorce, Ad married a woman named Jolanda. Not long afterward, in April 1995, Angelica died by suicide. At about 5:15 p.m. on October 6, 1995, about 6 months after her mother's death, Nicole left her grandmother's house on her bike. She was heading to her part-time job at a bakery that was about 6 miles from her grandmother's home. But sadly, she never made it there. Nicole's boss called her family and told them that she didn't arrive at work. So her family called the police. At first, the police didn't take her disappearance too seriously. They thought that Nicole was upset over her mother's death, so she decided to reconnect with her biological father and his family in Germany. But her biological father had not seen or heard from her. So Nicole's family was able to convince the police to look for her. The day after Nicole went missing, her bike was found in the Domel River, which is one of the rivers that runs through Eindhoven. The police dragged the river, but they could not find any trace of Nicole. 2 weeks after Nicole went missing, her backpack was found near a canal in the city. But it contained no clues as to what happened to Nicole. On November 22, 1995, about 2 months after Nicole vanished, a person was driving on a road that runs between the Netherlands cities of Merlot and Lierop. They saw what they thought was a body in some woods beside the road. They alerted the police, who came to the area. According to the dental records, the body was 15-year-old Nicole van den Hurk. Her body was found about 6 miles from her grandmother's home. An autopsy was conducted, and the medical examiner determined that she had suffered a broken jaw and other head injuries. It also appeared that she had been stabbed in the chest. It is believed that she died from internal bleeding. Nicole's family wanted to bury her quickly, so not much time was taken examining the remains. The police investigated the murder, but no arrests were made in the case in 1995. Then in February 1996, the police arrested a man who was a friend of the Van den Hurk family. He was arrested for drug trafficking. The police thought that Nicole might have been mixed up in the trafficking and she was killed because of her involvement. But the police found no evidence that she was connected to the drug trafficking. The police then turned their attention to Nicole's stepfather, Ad, and her stepbrother, Andy. The police thought it was strange that Andy moved in with his father just after Nicole went missing. But once again, no one was charged because no evidence connected them to the murder. It wasn't long before the case went cold. 9 years after the murder, in 2004, the case was reopened. But yet again, no arrests were made. In March 2011, Andy van den Hurk, Nicole's stepbrother, was living in Hertfordshire, England. On March 8, 2011, he made a posting on Facebook that reads, "I will be arrested today at the murder of my sister. I confess we'll get in contact soon." Andy then went to the local police station and turned himself in. Days later, he was extradited to the Netherlands. But he did not stay in custody for very long. He was released after 5 days because, besides his confession, nothing else linked him to the murder. A few days after he was released, Andy accused his father, Ad, of killing Nicole. Andy said that Ad had been sexually abusing Nicole and she became pregnant. So Ad killed her. Ad was mortified by the accusation and he adamantly denied sexually abusing Nicole and killing her. The police decided to investigate Andy's claims by exhuming Nicole's body. Her remains were exhumed in September 2011, and they were sent to the Netherlands Forensic Institute. Evidence from the crime scene was also examined for DNA. The DNA experts found something unusual. One sample had traces of semen from 3 different men. One of the men was Nicole's boyfriend at the time. Another set of DNA supposedly belonged to Nicole's stepbrother, Andy. And the third set of DNA was from a man only identified as Joost de Jay. Joost de Jay's hairs were also found on Nicole's coat. In January 2014, the police arrested Joost de Jay. Joost de Jay was 28 years old when Nicole was murdered. When he was arrested, he was being held in a psychiatric hospital. He had been there since 2000. He was committed to the hospital after he was convicted of sexually assaulting his girlfriend. This was not his only conviction for sexual assault. Another time, he pulled a 20-year-old woman off her bike and sexually assaulted her in some woods. The police thought that that crime was very similar to what happened to Nicole. But this time, the victim ended up dead. Andy van den Hurk then talked to the media about his confession. He swore that he had nothing to do with his stepsister's murder. He thought that the case had become too cold, so he only confessed to get the investigation going again. There had been major advances in DNA matching technology since the case was shelved in 2004. Andy thought if they started to investigate and they found DNA, it would clear his name and would hopefully reveal the identity of the person who killed her. But he could not explain how his DNA ended up on his stepsister's body. It was later determined that the DNA did not belong to Andy. Instead, it was believed to have belonged to a third, unidentified man. In the autumn of 2016, Joost de Jay went to trial for sexual assault and manslaughter. Joost de Jay said that he did not sexually assault Nicole or kill her. He said that he may have had consensual sex with her, but he didn't remember. His lawyer argued that the presence of his DNA only showed that he had sex with Nicole, not that he killed her. He also pointed out that there was DNA found on Nicole that was from a third, unknown individual. He argued that a third person could have been the one who killed Nicole. The prosecutor had a DNA expert testify, and he said that the DNA sample was most likely contaminated. He noted that 20 years earlier, when Nicole was killed, investigators weren't as careful about collecting and storing evidence. For example, someone could have swabbed the DNA sample with a swab that already had someone else's DNA on it. The DNA that was already on the swab could have been that of the third unidentified individual. The expert pointed out that Joost de Jay's DNA was found in several places on Nicole's body and coat, whereas the DNA from the third individual was only found in one spot. The prosecution also argued that Joost de Jay's explanation as to how his DNA was found on Nicole did not make any sense. They did not think that it was likely that a 15-year-old girl would stop off for sex with an anonymous man who was nearly twice her age on her way to work. In November 2016, a panel of judges found Joost de Jay guilty of sexual assault but acquitted him of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 5 years of prison. The prosecution appealed the verdict. In October 2018, 23 years after Nicole Hurk was murdered, the appeal judges reversed the verdict. They did not think that the DNA evidence of the third individual had any evidential value. They ended up sentencing Yossier to 12 years of prison for manslaughter. Andy Hurk was happy that his stepsister's killer was arrested and convicted. He said that after he accused his father of sexually assaulting and murdering Nicole, their relationship became strained. He hopes in the future their relationship will improve. Number 1. Andrew Bagby. Andrew Bagby was born in September 1973. He was the only child of David and Kathleen Bagby. He grew up in Sunnyvale, California. In 1996, Andrew enrolled in the medical school at Memorial University of Newfoundland in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. In 1999, Andrew started dating Shirley Turner, a fellow med school student. Shirley was 12 years older than Andrew. She was twice divorced and she had 3 children. But she had given up custody of all 3 children. Andrew graduated in May 2000 and he got residency as a surgeon in Syracuse, New York. A month later, Shirley got a job in Sac City, Iowa. She lasted a year at the job and then moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Around the same time, Andrew decided to change his residency. He moved to Latrobe, Pennsylvania to do a residency at a family practice. Andrew and Shirley tried long-distance dating, but it didn't seem to be working. In late 2001, Shirley told Andrew she was 3 months pregnant with his baby. Not long after that, she flew to Latrobe to talk about their relationship. On November 3, 2001, several days after Shirley arrived, she admitted that she was not pregnant. This was the proverbial straw, and Andrew broke up with Shirley. He dropped her off at the airport, and he hoped to never see her again. The next day, at about 1 p.m., Shirley got into her Toyota RAV4 and started driving toward Latrobe, which is about 940 miles from her home in Council Bluffs. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, Shirley knocked on Andrew's door. Andrew was shocked, but agreed to meet with her later that day. Andrew went to work and told his colleague about the incident. Andrew told his colleague he'd come by his house that night at around 7 o'clock to tell him about his meeting with Shirley. But Andrew never showed up. The next morning, 28-year-old Andrew Bagby's body was found in the parking lot of Keystone State Park. He had been shot a total of 5 times, once in the face, the chest, the back of the head, and then twice in the buttocks. The bullets were .22 caliber. Andrew's friends and colleagues told the police to look at Shirley Turner as a suspect. Shirley admitted to the police that she had recently purchased a Phoenix Arms HP 22 handgun. But she said she didn't know where the handgun was. Shirley was asked where she was on the day Andrew was killed. She said she was sick and had been home all day in Council Bluffs. So the police checked her cell phone records. They found that her phone had been used several times between Council Bluffs and Latrobe before the murder. It was then used several times between Latrobe and Council Bluffs after the murder. The phone records clearly show that Shirley had driven to Latrobe and back to Council Bluffs around the time of the murder. Also, someone had logged into Shirley's Hotmail and eBay accounts on Andrew's computer several hours before the murder. Faced with this evidence, Shirley changed her story. She said she had driven to Latrobe and met with Andrew in the parking lot of the state park. It was there that she gave him the missing handgun. She said that when she left him, he was fine. The police did not believe her story. While the police were confident that Shirley had killed Andrew, they had to do something to lock down crucial evidence against her. They had to manually check all the cell phone towers. The process took about 2 weeks. During that time, Shirley slipped back into her native Canada and ended up in her hometown, St. John's, Newfoundland. Nevertheless, Shirley was charged with Andrew's murder. She was arrested by the St. John's police on December 12, 2001. But she didn't stay in custody for very long. She was released on bail the next day. In February 2002, Shirley Turner held a press conference. She announced that she was 4 months pregnant, and Andrew Bagby was the father. Not long after the press conference, Andrew's parents, Dave and Kathleen Bagby, moved to St. John's to start fighting for custody of the child. In court, they argued that Shirley had been charged with the premeditated murder of the father of the baby, and she was therefore unfit to have custody. They said she was just not unfit, but letting her have custody of the baby was possibly dangerous. Unfortunately, several things worked against the Bagbys. The first is that they could not do a paternity test until after the baby was born. So they could not be considered for custody until after the baby was born, and a test proved that the baby was their grandchild. Also, Shirley had not been convicted of the murder, so she was therefore still innocent in the eyes of the law. Another problem is that the court systems in Canada can move slowly when it comes to extradition. On July 18, 2002, Shirley gave birth to a son, whom she named Zachary Andrew Turner. Shirley told the courts that she was worried that the Bagbys would kidnap Zachary. So at first, Kathleen and David were only granted supervised visits for 1 hour every week. Then on November 14, 2002, Shirley Turner was placed in jail. She was supposed to stay in jail until a decision was made on her extradition. While she was in jail, she gave the Bagbys custody of Zachary. They had full custody while she was in jail. But there were some conditions to their custody. Every day, Shirley was allowed to call the Bagbys to talk about Zachary. They also had to bring Zachary to jail for weekly visits with Shirley. That meant the Bagbys were forced to associate and make small talk with a woman who killed their son in cold blood. In late 2002, Shirley wrote to the judge on her case. The judge responded with an explanation on how to write an appeal on his own decision. Shirley followed the judge's instructions and filed an appeal. On January 10, 2003, a judge heard Shirley's appeal. The judge asked Shirley, who was charged with first-degree murder, would she promise to behave herself if she were released from jail. Shirley promised she would be on her best behavior. So the judge ruled she was allowed to stay out of jail until she heard about the decision on her extradition. In her ruling, the judge said that Shirley had been accused of committing a dangerous offense, but she was not a danger to the public. Essentially, the judge thought that Shirley was angry and she killed the man she was angry with, but it was doubtful that she would hurt anyone else. But there was evidence that Shirley was dangerous to other people. For example, while she was in jail, she had threatened to stab another woman with a fork. Also, 8 people had restraining orders against her. After Shirley was released from jail, she was given custody of Zachary. The Bagbys continued to have supervised visits with Zachary 3 times a week. But this involved even more contact with Shirley. During these meetings, Shirley would ask what Andrew was like when he was a baby. David and Kathleen said that they were disgusted by how much time they had to spend with a woman who shot their son to death because he no longer wanted to date her. They said that they endured it just to be around their only grandchild. Also, when Shirley did eventually go away to prison, they wanted to make sure that Zachary knew them and was comfortable with them so that the transition to their custody would be smooth. In early July 2003, Shirley started dating a man who lived in Conception Bay, Newfoundland. After 2 dates, the man learned that Shirley was suspected of killing her former boyfriend, so he broke it off with Shirley. Shirley did not take the breakup well. She started harassing the man. She left him over 200 harassing messages. The man contacted the police, but he did not give his name and he refused to file any criminal charges. Had he filed charges, Shirley's custody of Zachary might have been revoked. On August 18, 2003, Shirley drove with Zachary to Conception Bay. She gave Zachary some formula that was laced with sleeping pills. She also took some sleeping pills herself. Then, with 13-month-old Zachary strapped to her chest, Shirley, who was 42 years old, jumped from a fishing wharf into the Atlantic Ocean. Their bodies were found several hours later. Before Shirley died, she left some evidence to make it look like the man she had gone on 2 dates with was responsible for her and Zachary's death. But the police were quickly able to determine that the man had nothing to do with the deaths. They knew it was a murder-suicide perpetrated by Shirley Turner. Kathleen and David Bagby were forced to identify Zachary's body. David said, in hindsight, he wished he had killed Shirley. He thought about slipping out one night after Kathleen took a sleeping pill. After he killed her, he would come home and go to bed. Even if they did arrest him, Kathleen could honestly say she had nothing to do with the murder. David said he probably would have gone to prison, but Zachary would still be alive and Kathleen would hopefully have custody of him. But in the end, they scattered Zachary's ashes in the same places where his father Andrew's ashes were scattered. While the Bagbys were fighting for custody of Zachary and Shirley was awaiting extradition, a childhood friend of Andrew, Hurk, who became a filmmaker, started to do interviews with friends and family of Andrew. From his interviews, it is clear that Andrew was deeply loved by everyone who knew him. Kenny planned to make a video scrapbook so Zachary could get a sense of what his father was like since he was never going to meet him. Since Zachary would never see the footage, Kenny used the footage to create a heartbreaking documentary entitled Dear Zachary, a letter to his son about his father. Thanks to the Bagby's advocacy, changes were made in Canada's legal system. Judges can now deny bail to people who are accused of committing serious crimes for the protection of their children. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please check out criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/criminallylisted. But that's all for today. Thank you again for watching.